Don't let anyone disenfranchise you because you're a young man, especially a young white male man. Don't ever let anyone talk down to you. We need strong men out there.
A comedian named Drew Ski just dropped one of the most viral skits of the entire year. The title alone tells you everything about why it hit so hard. It's called How Conservative Women in America Act. And from the very first second it started spreading online, everyone watching knew exactly who it was pointing at. The impersonation targets Erika Kirk. Specifically, the version of Erika Kirk the public has been seeing since Charlie's passing. The carefully managed, deeply strange, skin-crawling PR tour that has left millions of people across the entire political spectrum feeling genuinely unsettled every single time they watched it play out live. Left, right, center. Nobody was comfortable watching it. And the response to Drew Ski's skit? Immediate, massive, cross-partisan in a way that almost nothing manages to be in today's divided political climate. Nearly 1 million likes on X alone within 24 hours of posting. Comments flooding in from conservatives, liberals, independents, political observers, entertainment commentators, people who agree on virtually nothing, all nodding at the same video, feeling the exact same thing. Because the discomfort that Erika Kirk's public behavior has stirred up since Charlie's passing isn't a partisan reaction, it's a human one. Drew Ski spotted that, locked in on it, and executed with the kind of precision and timing that made the whole thing look effortless, even though it clearly was not. Let's break down exactly why this skit worked so completely. The genius of what Drew Ski pulled off isn't just that he was funny, though he absolutely was. It's that he didn't have to invent or exaggerate a single thing. The material was already out there, documented, filmed, publicly available, sitting in archives across every major platform, just waiting for someone with the right comedic instincts to hold it up at the right angle and let people see it for what it really was.
Through a stream of fireworks and sparklers and stand there in a glittering pantsuit and talk about electing J.D. Vance 3 months after your husband was killed. Many people feel that there is something off about that.
Erika Kirk's post-passing public behavior handed him everything he needed. The dramatic stage entrances complete with production effects and music that felt more like a concert arrival than a grieving widow's public appearance. The calculated emotional performances that never quite tracked the way real, unscripted grief actually looks. The merchandise. The book tour. For a book she apparently hadn't fully read. The carefully rehearsed phrases recycled across interview after interview with the kind of consistency that reads as scripted, not heartfelt. And that one thing, the thing Joe Rogan called demonic, that millions of people have watched repeatedly and still cannot rationally explain. Drew Ski didn't need to add anything to make this land. He just held up a mirror, and the reflection was already strange enough to do all the work. But the research behind the execution, that deserves its own recognition. This was not a lazy, surface-level impersonation. The Drew Ski team actually did the homework. They locked in on specific mannerisms, specific moments, specific documented behavior, showing real engagement with the material rather than a broad caricature built on general impressions. They even worked in a reference to the ALO yoga situation, the documented purchase of thousands of dollars in premium athletic clothing the day after Charlie's passing, which has become one of the most specific and symbolic data points in the broader conversation about Erika's emotional state in those immediate moments. That detail hit hard because it's not vague. It's a real, receipt-backed, verified timeline that the research community had been breaking down in detail. Including it in mainstream comedy content sent a clear signal. Whoever put this together actually went down the rabbit hole, not just skimmed what was floating on the surface. Now let's talk about the reactions, because the response to this skit is just as revealing as the skit itself, and honestly might be even more entertaining. The people who got most visibly upset about Drew Ski's video, the exact same people who have been the loudest and most aggressive in their stated commitment to free speech, to the importance of comedy, to the idea that real Americans love to laugh at public life and its absurdities, the same ones who built their whole brand around defending comedians from oversensitive critics. Ted Cruz, who not long ago was publicly tweeting that the left hates comedy, positioning himself as a champion of unrestricted humor, reposted Drew Ski's video with a comment calling it beneath contempt. Same man, same platform, same topic of comedy targeting a public figure. The only thing that changed is who was being lampooned. And suddenly, the great defender of free comedic expression can't find his principles anywhere. That level of situational hypocrisy is extraordinary, even by the standards of modern political commentary, and it does not go unnoticed. The argument that comedy is sacred and should be protected from oversensitivity only carries weight when it's applied consistently. The moment you defend comedy that targets your opponents while attacking comedy that targets your allies, you've revealed that your commitment was never to the principle. It was to the team. And Drewski's skit exposed that with devastating clarity without even trying. Then there was Tim Pool, the perpetually beanie-wearing political commentator, who apparently felt so moved by Drewski's video that he produced his own response content with the remarkably earnest title, "He Mocked Her. We're in it now." That title alone is worth sitting with for a second. The level of gravity being applied to a comedian doing an impression of a public figure's documented public behavior suggests a relationship to comedy and public accountability that is, to put it charitably, highly selective. Tim Pool has built a significant portion of his platform on saying provocative things about political figures he opposes. But apparently, a comedian doing that exact same thing to someone in his own camp becomes a moment of civilizational significance, worthy of urgent content production. And here's the detail nobody could miss. His own co-hosts were reportedly struggling to contain their laughter while he sat there mapping out the geopolitical stakes of Drewski impersonating a widow in yoga pants. When the people sitting right next to you can't keep a straight face during your solemn defense of the wounded party, the performance has already failed on its own terms. Tim's attempted rebuttal, which largely involved directing blame toward the left and toward women in general for the criticism of Erika Kirk, missed the point so completely that it actually strengthened Drewski's original argument, because the uncomfortable reality that Tim Pool and everyone else performing outrage about this skit are working overtime to avoid acknowledging is simple and documented. Most of the criticism of Erika Kirk has not come from the left. It has come from within the conservative movement itself, from Candace Owens, who has an entire 8-part investigative series about her, from Joe Rogan, whose political positioning has been reliably supportive of the current administration, from former Turning Point USA insiders, from conservative commentators, from people who genuinely love Charlie Kirk and feel that what has been done with his legacy is a straight-up betrayal. Blaming the left for the Erika Kirk skepticism isn't just inaccurate. It's exactly the kind of bad faith deflection that makes the skeptics more credible, not less. Joe Rogan's engagement with the Erika Kirk situation deserves its own moment here, because the fact that it's Joe Rogan talking about this changes the entire social permission structure of the conversation in a way that Tim Pool and Ted Cruz are trying very hard not to acknowledge. Joe Rogan is not a left-wing culture critic. He is not someone with a documented history of going after conservative figures for partisan reasons. His support for the current administration has been consistent and vocal. His audience skews heavily toward the right side of the political spectrum. His credibility within the conservative community is substantial. And yet, Joe Rogan looked at Erika Kirk's public behavior and said, there is something genuinely off about her, that he feels it, that his listeners feel it, that the conversations circulating about her potential connections and public role are things he has been hearing from people in circles he takes seriously. He didn't endorse every specific theory. He was clear that some of the more extreme claims are deep in conspiracy territory, but he validated the core observation that Erika Kirk's public presence radiates something that does not register as normal in any framework he has available to assess it. When Joe Rogan makes that observation, specifically because of who he is, what his track record looks like, and who his audience is, it signals to a very large group of people who had been feeling that discomfort privately that their perception isn't partisan bias or unfair grief policing, it's pattern recognition. And Drewski's skit landing the week after Joe's comments were already circulating, that dropped into an audience fully primed to recognize exactly what was being lampooned, and exactly why. Now let's address the white face debate, because it surfaced in the reaction to the skit, and it deserves to be addressed clearly and specifically, so the argument can be evaluated on its actual merits rather than on the outrage. A segment of the far-right commentary ecosystem tried to frame Drewski's impersonation of Erika Kirk as the equivalent of blackface, arguing that if the racial positions were reversed, and a white comedian had done the same to a black public figure, the reaction would be totally different, and that therefore, there's a double standard. But this argument falls apart on multiple levels, and the failure is so specific and so documentable that engaging with it seriously actually makes it worse for the people making it. Blackface is not simply a person of one race impersonating a person of another race. It is a specific, historically documented performance tradition with deep roots in American racial violence, emerging from minstrel shows in the 19th century that were specifically designed to dehumanize Black Americans, reinforce racial hierarchies, normalize ridicule, and provide cultural justification for the systemic discrimination and violence that defined the lived experience of Black Americans during that period and long after. Blackface wasn't just offensive comedy, it was cultural infrastructure for segregation, for economic exclusion, for justifying violence. The harm isn't located in the abstract principle of cross-racial impersonation. It's located in the specific historical function that practice served and the ongoing resonance that history still carries today. There is no equivalent historical practice of whiteface serving any comparable function of dehumanization, systemic oppression, or cultural justification for violence against white Americans. The comparison isn't a logical equivalence. It's an attempt to create false moral symmetry by stripping away the exact historical context that makes blackface specifically harmful. And the specific irony of this argument being deployed in defense of Erika Kirk, a wealthy, powerful, publicly prominent woman who has been widely accused of exploiting a major platform for personal financial gain, is rich enough to be its own separate comedy piece. The suggestion that Drew's impersonating a public figure whose behavior has been criticized across the entire political spectrum constitutes racial discrimination against white people requires completely abandoning any meaningful understanding of what racial discrimination actually is and does. The man on Twitter who went viral asking what would happen if a white comedian put on blackface to mock a Black leader's widow, and who apparently thought this was a devastating philosophical gotcha, demonstrated precisely the kind of motivated reasoning that makes political discourse so persistently frustrating, because the answer to his hypothetical is simple and has nothing to do with double standards. It would be different because blackface carries a specific historical meaning and function that whiteface does not, and that difference is not arbitrary. It is historical, documented, and morally significant in ways that require genuine engagement rather than surface-level comparison. Candace Owens' reaction to the skit was the one that landed with particular authority, and not just because she is Erika Kirk's most prominent and most documented critic. Candace's reaction carried real weight because she placed the skit in a broader context that went beyond the specific impersonation and connected it to something she has been documenting in detail for months. Her point that Drewski's video succeeded because it captured something real about a specific category of public performance, what she describes as Christian grifting, resonated deeply with an audience that has been watching that pattern play out with increasing specificity across every aspect of the Erika Kirk situation. Because the specific behavior Drewski lampooned, the performance of faith, of grief, of traditional values, of Christian identity, in service of what critics argue is a fundamentally self-interested agenda of power accumulation and financial extraction, is something people who have been paying attention recognize immediately. It's not just that the grief seemed performed, the faith seemed performed, the traditional values seemed performed, the entire identity of the conservative Christian widow carrying her husband's legacy forward seemed performed, like a costume worn to access a specific audience's trust and a specific community's financial loyalty. And Drewski lampooned exactly that, the performance of an identity that does not appear to match the documented private reality, with enough precision and accuracy that even Candace Owens, the most rigorous investigator of this situation, had to acknowledge that the comedian had captured something genuinely real. The observation that Erika Kirk is apparently a very litigious person and that Drewski was apparently smart enough to avoid naming her directly in the video adds another layer of meaning to this whole conversation. Because the fact that someone making satirical comedy about a public figure's documented public behavior had to think carefully about the legal risk of being too specific tells you something important about how that public figure has been responding to scrutiny. Satire and parody of public figures is one of the most legally protected forms of expression in the American legal tradition. And for good reason. The ability to hold powerful people up to ridicule, to use humor as a tool of accountability, to make audiences laugh at the gap between a public figure's stated values and their documented behavior. That's not an attack. That's democracy working exactly as designed. Free expression, Real free expression is something democratic societies have recognized as essential precisely because it cannot be silenced by power, money, or legal intimidation, the way that straightforward journalism sometimes can be. The fact that a comedian doing exactly that feels the need to be legally careful about how specifically he identifies his subject, and the fact that that caution is apparently warranted based on patterns of behavior from Erika's team, is a major data point about the kind of environment being created around anyone who dares to scrutinize this situation publicly. The same environment that produced the alleged threats against Joe Rogan's podcast. The same environment that produced the loyalty purges and firing practices. The same environment in which a whistleblower apparently vanished after claiming to have documentation of financial misconduct. Drewski navigating all of that with comedic precision, making the point without creating the legal opening, is itself an act of straight-up intelligence that deserves its own recognition. And the specific hypocrisy the skit exposed, the MAGA free speech absolutism that apparently has a hidden asterisk that activates the moment the target of comedy is someone from within the movement rather than outside it, is the most enduring and most valuable thing this whole moment produced. Because the eruption of outrage around the skit's reception forced a very public demonstration of exactly how situational these stated principles actually are. Free speech advocates who defend the right of comedians to say anything about anyone until the anyone in question is someone they want to protect. Champions of accountability and transparency who demand public figures answer for their behavior until the public figure in question is performing the right ideological identity. Believers in the sacred importance of humor as a tool of truth-telling, until the truth being told through humor is uncomfortable enough to require that the humor be condemned as beneath contempt. These contradictions were always there, buried inside the free speech absolutism being performed by people like Ted Cruz, but it takes a specific kind of catalyst to make them publicly visible in a way that can't be argued away or reframed. Drewski provided exactly that catalyst, and the outraged responses from the people most committed to the free speech performance provided the confirmation that made the whole thing complete. The bottom line of what Drewski accomplished here goes well beyond a viral comedy moment, though it is absolutely that too. He took something millions of people had been feeling privately, a profound, specific, cross-partisan discomfort, with the public behavior of a very specific person in a very significant situation, and gave it a form that people could share, laugh at, and point to as collective acknowledgement that the feeling was real and widely shared. He removed the social cost of expressing that discomfort by making it funny. He made it possible for people who had been hesitant to voice their skepticism because voicing it could be framed as attacking a grieving widow or dismissing legitimate conservative leadership to participate in the conversation through the lower stakes medium of sharing a comedy video. That function, the democratization of discomfort through comedy, is exactly what the best satire has always done in its most valuable moments. It names the thing that everyone is sensing, but that social pressure is preventing from being said directly. And in a situation where that pressure has been applied through legal threats, loyalty purges, platform pressure, and reputation attacks against anyone who raises questions, a comedian naming the thing through laughter is not just entertainment. It is a service. Drewski knocked it completely out of the park, and the outrage that followed was the most perfect possible confirmation that he hit exactly what he was aiming at. If this breakdown gave you something to think about, hit that like button and make sure you're subscribed so you never miss when we go deep on the stories everyone else is tiptoeing around. Share this one with someone who needs to see it. Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and we'll see you in the next one.